January. 31 days. Cold weather outside the walls, and inside those walls, men were dying. No statistics. Not inmate numbers. Not headlines. Men. Sons, fathers, brothers, grandfathers. In the month of January 2026 alone, dozens of people lost their lives while in the custody of the Georgia Department of Corrections. Today, we say their names. And we speak, we ask, we demand answers for the hard questions. Because when someone is sentenced to prison, they are sentenced to time, not to death. What I'm about to do right now is dive into some of the news clips that are centered around some of these deaths and some of the other deaths going on that have gone on inside the Georgia Department of Corrections. This is the list for January. Right now it is March 4th. The list for February is on the way. Here's the reality of the situation. There's more people that have died in general population this year than have died on death row for as long as it's been in existence. Think about that. You're more likely to die in general population than you are on death row. Let's dive in.
The Department of Corrections says the fight involved gang-affiliated inmates. This all happened at the Washington State Prison in Davisboro, Georgia, a medium security facility about 130 miles southeast of Atlanta. Authorities now say this disturbance started on a sidewalk inside the prison and was brought under control by staff late Sunday afternoon. Officials have confirmed the names of the three men who died: 23-year-old Ahmaud Hatcher, 42-year-old Jimmy Trammell, and 27-year-old Teddy Jackson. Trammell was scheduled to be released from prison within days before the incident. 13 inmates were taken to local hospitals, and one corrections officer suffered non-life-threatening injuries. As staff deployed non-lethal weapons to regain control, Washington State Prison remains on lockdown today while the GDC leads an active investigation into the cause and really the dynamics of this disturbance.
At 5, an inmate at Hancock State Prison was killed on Sunday. According to the Georgia Department of Corrections, Stephen Wood died after an altercation with another inmate. GDC says the death is being investigated by the GDC's Office of Professional Standards. It's normal procedure. Wood was serving life with parole for murder out of Cherokee County. Our top story at 6, an inmate at Macon Central State Prison is dead after being stabbed early Sunday morning. That's according to Bibb County Coroner Leon Jones, who identified the man who died as 28-year-old Hollis Bryant. The Georgia Department of Corrections says it happened during an altercation between Bryant and inmate Carlos Gadsden. Bryant was serving a life sentence after being convicted of a 2019 murder in Toombs County. Gadsden was sentenced to 20 years for child molestation in Chatham County. The Department of Corrections says the early investigation indicates Gadsden was acting in self-defense, but the investigation is ongoing.
A Reveal investigation has uncovered an unprecedented number of people who died inside Georgia prisons last year. We've learned the U.S. Department of Justice is now likely investigating after human rights groups say the state didn't do enough to stop it. Reveal investigator Andy Parati explains.
An hour a day between noon and 1. That's when India Tarver says her son Bobby Thompson knew to call her at work.
12 and 1 o'clock. He know the time, and he was never late.
Phone calls she looked forward to nearly every day that suddenly stopped on September 23rd, 2020.
So when that Monday came, I didn't hear from him. I had a gut feeling in my stomach, and I called the facility.
That facility is Wheeler Correctional in Alamo, Georgia, where Bobby was incarcerated since last January. Doctors diagnosed the 24-year-old father of three with bipolar disorder long before he arrived. Prison officials knew about it.
So everyone knew, as far as I know, that he had a mental disorder.
They knew.
They knew.
And prison officials also knew to check on Bobby every 15 minutes when they put him in an isolation room to help calm him down. Policy mandated it. Instead, an officer waited more than 2 hours to make his rounds that day. By then, though, Bobby tied a bedsheet around his neck from the top bunk. Even after the officer found Bobby not breathing, he's seen walking to get help. It took an additional 7 minutes to open the cell door to start CPR.
Want me to talk about my son because I'm so in disbelief that he's gone.
A Reveal investigation uncovered Bobby is one of at least 29 people who died by suicide at Georgia correctional facilities last year, a rate about 3 times the national average at state prisons. At least 26 people were murdered behind bars too. That's more than the 2 previous years combined.
In my 20 years on the front lines of this, I have never seen the prison so chaotic, so violent, and so out of control.
Sarah Tatachi is the executive director of the Southern Center for Human Rights. In September, her organization sent this letter to the U.S. Justice Department asking the federal government to intervene.
This problem is too big to just power through. We need significant intervention.
I think that my son's death could have been prevented.
A mother who wanted more time with her son on the phone instead now watches his last minutes alive on prison security video. Why did you want to see that video?
Because that's my son. I saw him come in this world. I want to see how he went out. That's my baby, my only son.
The commissioner of the Georgia Department of Corrections declined to be interviewed, but in a statement to the Reveal wrote, "This has been an extremely difficult year for all of us, including those serving time in prison. Balancing keeping our inmates safe and healthy during a pandemic while also trying to curb violence presented a unique challenge." The U.S. Justice Department declined to confirm or deny whether an investigation is underway.
Our top story tonight at 5, an inmate at Telfair State Prison has died, according to the Georgia Department of Corrections.
A spokesperson says Lester Smith died at the prison on Monday, but did not provide further details. According to GDC, his body has been turned over to the county coroner and will be taken to the GBI crime lab to determine the official cause of death. Smith was sentenced to serve life with parole for murder out of Cobb County.
In Telfair County, the Georgia Department of Corrections confirms an inmate died at the Telfair State Prison on Saturday. Officials say that according to the preliminary investigation, Lamar Wilson was killed during an altercation with another inmate. As of now, they believe Wilson was the aggressor. He was serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery out of Tift County.
Now here's what makes this heavier. These deaths didn't happen at one facility. They happened across Macon State Prison, Washington State Prison, Baldwin State Prison, Telfair State Prison, Coastal State Prison, Augusta State Medical Prison, Hancock State Prison, Wilcox State Prison, Johnson State Prison, and others. Different locations, same system. So the question becomes, is this coincidence or is this a pattern? In January and surrounding months, Washington State Prison saw violent disturbances, gang-related fights that left multiple inmates dead and others injured, including correctional officers. Hancock State Prison reported an inmate beaten in his own cell. There have been documented reports of gang activity, understaffing, contraband weapons, delayed medical care, security breakdowns. When prisons become environments where violence becomes normalized, death stops being shocking. And that should scare all of us, because prison is supposed to be secure, controlled, supervised. Some men were older. Some had medical issues. Augusta State Medical Prison houses many who are chronically ill. But here's the deeper question. If someone dies of natural causes in custody, was the care adequate? Was treatment timely? Were warnings ignored? We cannot just say natural causes and close the file, because transparency matters. Let's humanize this. Some of these men were in their 20s, some in their 30s, 50s, 70s, different crimes, different background, different religions, different races, different stories. But every one of them had someone who got a call, a mother who collapsed in her kitchen, a sister who had to tell her children, a son who realized he'd never get another visit. Prison sentences rippled beyond the walls. So do prison deaths.
The woman we spoke with didn't want to go on camera, but says her 20-year-old son in Coastal State Prison has been complaining for 2 weeks of COVID-19 related symptoms. She says he still has not yet been tested for the virus.
To me, they don't care.
This mom, who didn't want to go on camera, says her son is experiencing COVID-19 related symptoms at the Coastal State Prison, but not being treated.
My son calling me, crying, asking me on the outside to help him, where there's medical attention inside of the facility, but y'all not utilizing it because you don't care.
She says when her son told prison medical staff that he was having problems, they gave him an EKG test, which came back normal. The mom says her son went to the prison's medical unit 3 more times, complaining of his symptoms, but wasn't evaluated for COVID-19.
Are these symptoms that my son having, is it due to the COVID? Like, we don't know.
Finally, after speaking with the warden this morning, she says tomorrow her son will receive an x-ray.
But my concern is why 2 weeks later he's finally getting an x-ray, especially with the pandemic going on, with the COVID-19. Why is this not important now? Like, why didn't he get tested soon for, if not the COVID, then a chest x-ray to rule out pneumonia or something?
We've reached out numerous times to the Coastal State Prison and the Georgia Department of Corrections to find out why action has taken so long. We heard back from the GDC, who in a brief email directed all of our questions to their website, saying the GDC provides information related to our actions surrounding COVID-19 at Coastal and all of our facilities on our website. But after 5 inmates at the prison have already died from the virus, the mom says more awareness needs to come for those inside the prison.
Was they treated the same way my son was treated? Like, did they complain of they can't breathe or their chest hurting? People in prison, they need help too. They need medical attention too.
The woman we spoke with says she wants family members with loved ones in prison to do what they can to make sure they have the proper medical care. In Savannah, Jackson Kurtz, WJCL 22 News.
As the Department of Justice's investigation continues, more suicides and murders are happening within Georgia's prisons. The federal government launched an investigation in fall of 2021 into dangerous conditions inside prisons.
Now, a continuing problem for federal investigators, family of deceased prisoners, and the media, finding answers on hundreds of deaths inside those prison walls. One of the most recent deaths involved a Cochran man, Maurice Jenkins, found dead in Coastal State Prison last week. Ashlyn Webb joins us live in studio with more on his case.
Yes, Frank and Lori, we still don't have many answers from state authorities on how Jenkins died. Up until this afternoon, the Department of Corrections wouldn't confirm any details and told us via email that it was up to the family to release information. But it was Jenkins' sister who asked us for help trying to find out how her brother died in state custody. Now, the state says they're investigating his death as an alleged suicide.
And if something happened to him, they killed him. He told me they have done it before and covered it up as a suicide.
That's Charita Jenkins, Maurice Jenkins' sister. She says she was in shock Wednesday morning when she received this text from an inmate in the prison saying to check on her brother and that he heard Jenkins allegedly hung himself 2 hours earlier. Jenkins says she immediately started driving to the prison and calling to get answers.
No one answered. No one gave me any answers at the prison.
Jenkins claims hours passed and that no one from the prison told her until an employee who stated he was the warden walked out and confirmed.
When I tell you the breath and the wind came out of me, and all I said was, "Sir, why no one called me? Why?"
Jenkins says authorities left her and her family with unanswered questions on how her brother died, and also when guards last checked his cell. She says Jenkins had no signs of mental health problems.
He had done 9 of 12 years. he already had a plan to come home.
Jenkins says authorities refused to let her see his body until Friday, 2 days after Jenkins died. She claims he looked as though he'd been beaten and suffered from malnutrition.
His lips were swollen, like someone had punched him in the mouth. His nose was swollen.
Jenkins says she believes her brother was murdered. Again, the prison says they suspect he died from suicide, but the coroner's office is still investigating. Lori?
Thank you, Ashlyn. Tonight we're taking a closer look at death investigations in...
Well, an inmate has died at Dooley State Prison, and now investigators are working to determine what happened. The Georgia Department of Corrections confirmed the death but has not released the inmate's identity. Authorities say they do not suspect foul play at this time. The body's been turned over to the county coroner and will be sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab for an official cause of death.
Also new tonight, the Georgia Department of Corrections says an inmate died inside Telfair State Prison. They say Malinzo Hatcher died almost 2 weeks ago on July 21st. They say Hatcher got into a fight with another inmate. The Corrections Department will investigate, and Hatcher's body will be going to the GBI Crime Lab.
To our top story tonight at 5, an inmate at Central State Prison in Macon is dead. That's according to the Georgia Department of Corrections. Leon Kelly was killed following an altercation with another inmate on Monday.
GDC says the incident is being investigated by its Office of Professional Standards, and additional details are not available as the investigation is ongoing. They say Kelly was serving 10 years for possession with intent to distribute methamphetamine with a maximum release date of 2033.
Well, an inmate at Macon State Prison in Macon County is dead. According to the Georgia Department of Corrections, Anthony Knight died on December 10th. They say his body will be taken to the GBI Crime Lab to determine the official cause of death. Knight was serving 20 years for aggravated assault with a maximum release date of February 2031.
WTOC has confirmed that a second inmate has died at Coastal State Prison in just 1 week. The Georgia Department of Corrections says Malik Ortiz died at the prison on February 12th. The department says there were no reports or signs of a struggle. Ortiz was serving 15 years for a voluntary manslaughter conviction out of Fulton County. 4 days before his death, another inmate, DeJarvis Walker, also died. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation will perform both of the men's autopsies, and the Office of Professional Standards is investigating these deaths.
The United States Department of Justice has previously investigated violence and safety conditions in Georgia prisons. Advocacy organizations have tracked hundreds of deaths in recent years. Staff shortages, gang dominance in dorms, inmates policing other inmates when staff is overwhelmed, when security is stretched thin, when medical response is delayed, the risk of death increases. And when death increases, trust decreases. So here are the questions that deserve answers. How many of these January deaths were ruled homicide? How many are still under investigation? How many involve delayed medical response? How many families feel they receive full transparency? What changes have been implemented since prior investigation? Because awareness without accountability is noise, and accountability without action is theater.
In a WTOC exclusive interview, the wife of the
State Department of Corrections says it is investigating an inmate's death at Hancock State Prison. They say Trayvon Walthour died Sunday. He was serving 18 years for involuntary manslaughter in Liberty County. The prison system did not release any details on how he died. This month, the U.S. Department of Justice released a report saying violence in Georgia prisons was out of control. They blamed understaffing, gangs, contraband, and a culture of indifference by prison officials. The Justice Department also says state officials deliberately downplay the number of deaths in Georgia prisons.
Just hours before we came on air, we received confirmation about an inmate who died at Macon State Prison. The Georgia Department of Corrections investigating the death of Marquel Smith. Smith was serving a life sentence for armed robbery. We're still working to learn more about the death, and the GBI Crime Lab is attempting to determine the cause.
The State Corrections Department investigating the death of a Baldwin State Prison inmate after a fight. We received an email from the prison system this afternoon saying 39-year-old Johnny Vaughn died last Thursday. The email said he was one of several inmates involved in a fight inside the prison in Hardwick. His body was sent to the GBI for an autopsy. They have not released any further details on the fight or on Vaughn's death. The U.S. Justice Department is investigating deaths in Georgia prisons, claiming that understaffing has led to violence, suicides, and inhumane conditions. The Department of Corrections says Vaughn was convicted of rape in Richmond County in 2015 and was serving a life sentence.
Well, 2 inmates at Hancock State Prison are dead after an altercation on Thursday. According to the Georgia Department of Corrections, the incident between Prince Porter and William Holman appears to have been gang-related. The GDC says one of the inmates had no visible signs of injury and that his death appears to have been medically related. A 3rd inmate was taken to the hospital.
Right now, the Georgia Department of Corrections says it's investigating another inmate suicide, at least the 3rd in a Central Georgia prison this year. It happened this past weekend at Hancock State Prison. Chelsea Bimeford talked with the inmate's family, who says they're still piecing together why and how this happened.
That latest inmate suicide apparently happening here at Hancock State Prison. The Georgia Department of Corrections says officers found Gerald Florence Jr. unresponsive in his cell on Sunday night.
I just want some answers.
Shirley Patton says Monday morning she found out her son, Gerald Florence Jr., was dead, but says no one with the prison has explained what happened.
Nobody would talk to me or tell me anything. They just told me that I wasn't allowed to come to the prison.
Florence was an inmate at Hancock State Prison serving life without parole for murder, aggravated assault, armed robbery, and other charges.
He was on strip search, where he could have no clothes or anything. If he had no clothes or anything, why? What happened?
The Department of Corrections would not confirm that, but Patton says her son asked to be put in solitary confinement after receiving death threats from other inmates.
He had been sending me messages with names and everything because he feared for his life.
The Department of Corrections would not confirm that either, but told us they're not investigating Florence's death as a murder.
The coroner, the jail told him that it was a suicide.
Hancock County Coroner Adric Ingram says someone at the jail reportedly gave Florence a blanket around 4:15 Sunday afternoon. Around 4:40, guards found him unconscious. Ingram pronounced Florence dead around 10 p.m. at Navison Health in Milledgeville and says he had a cut on his neck. And right now, the Hancock County Coroner's Office says Florence's body has been turned over to the GBI for an autopsy. Reporting in Hancock County, Chelsea Bimeford, 13 WMAZ News.
We reported earlier this year on suicides at Hardwick State Prison in Milledgeville and Macon State Prison in Oglethorpe. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, there have been more than 20 suspected prison suicides statewide in the last year, compared to 8 the year before.
And now to a story you'll see only on WJCL 22. The family of an inmate who died last week at Smith State Prison is now considering taking legal action. That's according to the Human and Civil Rights Coalition of Georgia. WJCL 22 News' Brooke Butler has been working to uncover new information about this. She joins us now live from our newsroom tonight. Brooke, what can you tell us?
Shannon, the inmate's name was Lawrence Woods, and he was just 34 years old. The Georgia Department of Corrections has not yet revealed his cause of death, but the Human and Civil Rights Coalition of Georgia tells me he had been complaining of chest pain.
It's unfortunate, and that's the stuff that we continue to see on a daily and weekly basis.
Lawrence Woods is now the latest Smith State Prison inmate to have died behind prison walls.
He was in his cell and started complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath. There was no officers or staff around for him to receive any type of medical help.
That's Brian Randolph with the Human and Civil Rights Coalition of Georgia. He says he's in communication with inmates inside this prison.
The entire dorm started yelling and screaming and beating on the cell doors and windows for medical attention for him, and he never received it.
Woods was serving time for voluntary manslaughter, but Randolph says he was well liked among his fellow inmates.
The amount of people that reached out to us about him told us a lot about his character in the prison.
Randolph is in touch with Woods' family.
When I spoke with them, they had heard nothing from the prison as far as what exactly happened.
Randolph adds the family found out everything that happened from Woods' fellow inmates.
That was one of the biggest things that they were really upset about, is that they had received no information whatsoever from the prison. It all came from inmates.
That's why he says the family is now considering pursuing legal action against the Department of Corrections.
At some point, the courts are going to have to get involved.
And Brooke, the Department of Corrections tells you Woods' body has been sent for an autopsy to determine the cause of death.
Yes, Shannon, his body has been turned over to the county coroner. From there, it's going to be taken to the GBI crime lab. And Randolph tells me once Woods' family gets those results, they're going to consider taking any next steps. Back to you.
All right, Brooke, thanks so much for that information tonight.
Our top story at 11, a Telfair State Prison inmate has died following an altercation with another inmate. Georgia Department of Corrections Director of Communications Joan Heath says Eric Whitehead, who was serving life with parole for murder out of Richmond County, died on Wednesday. The GDC's Office of Professional Standards is investigating.
New tonight, an investigation underway after the death of an inmate in Coastal State Prison. According to the Department of Corrections, Ryan Archer died on December 13th after a fight with another inmate. Archer's body has been taken to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab for autopsy. He was serving 10 years in a prison, 2 of those for possession of a firearm and possession of methamphetamine out of Spalding County. His release date was scheduled for June 2024.
Now to a story you will only see on 11 Alive. A Georgia inmate beaten and stabbed. The attack caught on camera and shared on social media. Tonight, Troy Castleberry's family wants him transferred before he's killed, and Castleberry is serving an 18-year sentence tied to an armed robbery out of DeKalb County.
However, his family says they feel his life is in danger now. 11 Alive's Cody Alcorn joins us live in the studio. So, Cody, you watched the video. I watched it along with you, and you also spoke with the inmate's family tonight.
It's tough, Ron and Jennifer. I can't imagine that being my loved one and feeling so helpless. And then to find out through Facebook this happened to your loved one. The Castleberrys outraged at the silence from the prison and the Department of Corrections.
Beaten and stabbed multiple times.
And this is awful.
So much so we're blurring the attack. In the 1-minute, 18-second video taken from inside Smith State Prison, you see inmate Troy Castleberry sitting on the floor next to a bunk, his hands bound behind him, wearing only a pair of shorts. Castleberry is repeatedly punched and kicked in his head, throat, and chest by 3 inmates as a 4th inmate records the attack.
Hold on, let me see something.
That was the inmate who was recording. He's then seen joining in on the beating. Castleberry bleeding from his ears, nose, mouth, and chin.
Nobody deserves to be treated like that. Yes, he has done wrong. He's not an angel, but he's not a monster either.
Castleberry's family calling it a modern-day lynching.
My son could have lost his life.
Just over a minute into the video, you see one of the inmates pull out a shank. He's stabbed 4 times in the shoulder and upper arm before he's rolled over on the ground and stabbed another 7 times in the back. The video cuts off as the stabbing appears to continue.
Somebody actually said, "I'm sorry you lost your brother." My brother is not dead, but that video would leave him believe.
Castleberry's family has no idea what kind of condition he's in.
We still haven't been able to see him physically to know that he's okay.
That place is not fit for anyone to be incarcerated inside the wall.
There should be some accountability for what happened to my brother.
We reached out to the Department of Corrections regarding this video tonight. They sent us a 1-sentence statement saying they're investigating. This is the same prison the GBI arrested the warden back on February 8th on RICO charges tied to corruption inside the facility. And you can read more about that right now at 11alive.com.
Of summer officially kicked off at 4:51 this afternoon. Now our temperatures for today sat around 88 degrees. Our average high is 90. Last day of summer average.
At 5:30, just into our newsroom, the Georgia Department of Corrections has confirmed that an inmate of Valdosta State Prison, Ricky Harris, died after a, quote, altercation with his roommate, Medarius Johnson. Harris's body's been turned over to the county coroner and will be transported to the GBI crime lab to determine the official cause of death. Now, this death is being investigated by the Georgia Department of Corrections Office of Professional Standards.
Now, additional details are not available as this investigation is ongoing, but Harris was serving 15 years for aggravated assault out of Cherokee County with a maximum release date of April 2035. Johnson serving 3 years for possession of a firearm by a convicted felon out of Butts County with a maximum release date of August of 2025. GDC says that Johnson will now be charged in Harris's death.
New tonight, the State Corrections Department says an inmate died inside Telfair State Prison. They say Eric Whitehead died Wednesday after getting into a fight with another inmate. Whitehead's body will be sent to the GBI crime lab for an autopsy. Whitehead was serving a life sentence for murder in Richmond County.
And new this midday, a Hancock State Prison inmate is dead after a stabbing yesterday. Hancock County Coroner Dontrell Andrews tells us 36-year-old Andre Weems was stabbed during a morning fight. Andrews says the stabbing is being investigated by the Georgia Department of Corrections. This is at least the 5th homicide in Hancock State Prison this year. Andrews says there were at least 2 other deaths that weren't classified as homicides. We've reached out to the Department of Corrections for more information, but haven't heard back.
A Georgia correction officer is dead after an inmate attacked him with a homemade shank. Now, the Georgia Department of Corrections announced today that a correction officer, Robert Clark, was killed at Smith State Prison. They say Clark was escorting 2 inmates from the prison dining hall when inmate Leighton Lester attacked him from behind. One of the inmates Clark was escorting jumped in to help him. The inmate was then also attacked. Both Clark and the inmate were taken to the hospital where Clark died. The inmate is in stable condition. The Georgia Department of Corrections says Lester will be charged in Clark's assault and death. Clark had only worked at Smith State Prison for 5 months after joining the Department of Corrections in April of this year.
An inmate died at Macon State Prison on Sunday, according to the Georgia Department of Corrections. The inmate, identified as Shannon Pickett, his body has been turned over to the county coroner and will be taken to the GBI crime lab to determine the official cause of death. Pickett was serving 2 years on a probation revocation stemming from a 2003 charge for aggravated child molestation out of Floyd County.
New tonight, we have learned the name of the Central State Prison inmate who died after a fight with another inmate. Leon Kelly died Monday. Kelly was from Putnam County. His body was turned over to the county coroner. The GBI will determine an official cause of death. He was serving 10 years for possession with intent to distribute meth out of Putnam County. Meanwhile, at Johnson State Prison, Jason Mitchell died this week. He was serving 20 years for child molestation and was set to be released in 2025.
In Georgia, I'm standing in front of the Greyhound bus station where they were set to have a family reunion on Wednesday. They had it all planned out. Jimmy Trammell, who was going to be released from that prison in Washington County, catch a bus here to this Greyhound bus station and start his new life. But he was killed 4 days before his release.
He did 10 years in his prison, and he didn't make it home.
Home. It's where 42-year-old Jimmy Trammell expected to be Wednesday after 10 years as an inmate with the Georgia Department of Corrections for felony burglary charges.
He was going to be taking the bus back here, and he needed to be picked up from the bus station. And I was going to pick him up from the bus station, but I didn't get that chance.
According to Aquinas, his brother Jimmy Trammell was killed Sunday as fights broke out in the Washington State Prison in Washington County. Trammell is one of 3 inmates who were killed. The Department of Corrections saying Ahmoud Hatcher and Teddy Jackson are the other 2 inmates. At least 13 other inmates and a corrections officer were injured. Aquinas got a call from the warden in the early hours of Monday morning.
She just said he was involved in an altercation and he lost his life.
For Aquinas and Trammell, the past 10 years have been rough. They lost both of their parents and 2 siblings, but Trammell's release was a chance at a second life, the turning of a new leaf.
He talked about proving to me a better side of him than what I know, and that was taken away from me. And I need answers. I really do.
The Department of Corrections say this all started as an altercation on a sidewalk between inmates that were a part of gangs. Within 2 hours, though, they say they had this under control. But Trammell's family now obviously plan town. I'm Candace McCown for Channel 2. Action.
The Georgia Department of Corrections.
Some people will say they were criminals. They chose that life. They made their bed. But here's the reality. The state assumes responsibility for someone the moment they are incarcerated. The state controls their movement, their environment, their medical access, their safety. If the state cannot guarantee safety, then something is broken. and broken systems cost lives. January 2026 is not just a calendar page. It is a record of loss. It is a reminder that behind walls and razor wire, human beings still exist. And when we ignore what happens behind those walls, we'll allow silence to become policy.
Is investigating an inmate death tonight. It happened at Smith State Prison in Glenville on Sunday. We don't yet know the circumstances surrounding the man's death. We asked if it was a murder. Corrections officials tell us they have not made any kind of determination as to the matter of death yet. The victim's body was turned over to the county coroner. It will be taken to the GBI crime lab to determine the official cause of his passing.
Happening right now at 11, a Metro Atlanta father is looking for answers after he says his son was killed behind bars.
Tonight, that father is blaming understaffing in part for the death of his son, Ryan Archer, who was set to be released from prison early next year. 11 Alive's Cody Alcorn spoke with Ryan's father about his case and the founder of an organization on a mission to help families struggling to find answers within Georgia's Department of Corrections.
A silent bureaucracy. It's an impenetrable bureaucracy.
Susan Burns, founder of They Have No Voice.
We are strictly corrections advocacy in the Georgia prisons.
Tracking prison conditions, deaths, and staffing issues across the state.
We're at 4 times the level of homicides they had in 2018.
On December 13th, 26-year-old Ryan Archer, a father to a little girl waiting for him on the outside, was given an unexpected death sentence.
We don't really know what happened.
Archer serving time for drug and gun charges out of Spalding County. His dad, Michael, spoke to me over the phone.
He was a young man when he was making mistakes.
Serving out his sentence.
And you just don't think something like this would happen.
The Department of Corrections only confirming Ryan died at Coastal State Prison after an altercation with another inmate.
He was having a little trouble inside, but he did sound good on the 11th when he called. The next thing I know, he's moved off to Coastal from Wrightsville, and he made it less than 24 hours down there.
Feeling frustrated.
Something has got to change. For this to happen, being murdered inside.
Not surprising to Burns, who knows the dangers inside Georgia's prisons.
An understaffed prison is a very dangerous place, as this young man found out.
Ryan's death is the 15th at Coastal this year, only one of those being a homicide so far, which happened at the end of October. Ryan's cause and manner of death are still pending an autopsy, his dad tells me. They just want to know what happened to their son and hopes no other family ever has to get that phone call.
Cell phone video shot inside a Georgia prison provides a stark example of how few officers are actually on the job these days.
The video shows a dead prisoner slumped over a cell block railing while others complain he's been there for hours, all because no officer is on duty.
This is not about defending crime. This is not about excusing behavior. This is about accountability, transparency, human dignity. If someone is sentenced to 10 years, they should serve 10 years. Not 10 years or death. Today, we remember every name on that list and every name on past lists.
In their section of the prison.
Fox 5 I-Team reporter Randy Travis investigated the video and the disturbing number of job vacancies in Georgia Department of Corrections. Randy?
That's right, Russ and Courtney. The Department of Corrections knows it has a problem attracting and keeping employees. They've raised pay, held job fairs across the state, but in some prisons like this one, records show they have only a third of the staff they need.
As you can see, it is Sunday, July 3rd at 8:17 a.m.
This anonymous prisoner recorded multiple videos of a gruesome scene at Ware State Prison. We'll let him tell it.
No officer have came back in this building and checked on nobody in over 3 hours. We have an inmate here that is dead, been hanging right here for the past 2 hours, at least 2.5 hours, dead.
We've blurred the image of 54-year-old John Eckers serving life with parole for murder. His body was balanced on the railing of the second level, arms dangling down. A Department of Corrections spokesman says staff arrived 18 minutes after this video was recorded.
Dead. It's crazy. This is crazy.
Investigators determined foul play is not suspected. But that's not the biggest question here.
Why couldn't you guys have alerted the staff earlier?
How could we when no one is in the booth? When no one is around?
One of Ecker's fellow dorm members agreed to talk to us from his bunk, as long as we did not show his face.
Is the Georgia prison system a more dangerous system now than in the past because of staffing?
Well, of course it is. Of course it is.
Let's go. Georgia's prison system is already under federal investigation. The U.S. Justice Department building its case, starting with lawsuits filed by the Southern Center for Human Rights.
You have many facilities across the state running staffing vacancy rates that are close to 70%, so you really only have one officer in a situation where you need 3.
According to records Christina Remlin and her staff collected, Ware had a 68% job vacancy rate in January. The DOJ investigators actually paid a visit to Ware days before Ecker's body would be left hanging over a railing for hours.
I can't imagine a more dramatic illustration of the total crisis of violence and chaos inside of our prison systems.
The Department of Corrections turned down our request to interview Commissioner Timothy Ward. In a written statement, a spokesperson said, "We remain committed to ensuring the safety of both staff and offenders, and we continually evaluate any need for improvement in our processes."
I think the Department of Correction is trying to manipulate the free world to saying that it's not a problem.
Before he finished his sentence last year on drug charges, Andrew Richardson said he was stabbed by a fellow inmate multiple times.
And I was bleeding out in 3 ways, like the cartoon, the water coming out the cartoon, just bleeding, 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 bleeding. I'm passing out. We want an officer 100 foot away from him. No help.
He said the lack of officers made life more dangerous than when he first went to prison nearly 20 years ago. And for anyone who doesn't care about what happens to inmates, if a federal investigation determines civil rights violations, Georgia taxpayers could be on the hook for a lot of money.
I accepted my punishment. I took it. Now it's time for the Department of Correction to take their wrongdoing and to fix this.
They seem to be trying.
By joining the Georgia Department of Corrections, you become part of something.
Recruiters fan out across the state nearly every week. Entry-level pay is now more than $18 an hour. But in this economy...
Okay, so here's the situation, bro. It's too many deaths, and there seems to be no resolution, no solution, no positive outcome. Like I say, I have 35 for the month of January 2026, man, but I hadn't even got February's, but Tiffany just told me it's on the way, but the numbers are not looking good, bro. And I mean, y'all get in the comment section, let me know what y'all think, bro. It's just, it's dark. I'm sorry.